All right. So we are here doing conversation number 54. I'm reaching for my coffee, everybody. Sorry. So conversation number 54. Just so people know, life gets busy. We did keep like a pretty regular cadence for a while. And we're gonna still try to do that. But school year starting out for Josiah. Also, you know, basically, I have I'm a wagey now, I guess, in a way. Well, it's like, I mean, Josiah knows my life situation in terms of like I do have I'm not just like well, I mean, even back when I was like, working as a founder and entrepreneur and whatever, like I did have a lot of meetings, but I have more control, is what I'm saying. I still have a fair amount of control, actually, at my job. I have a pretty good position, I have to say, but um, you know, in terms of like our like recording podcasts and stuff, it's gotten a little bit just more difficult to regularly align our schedules. So that's why we have been like a little bit more regular recently. We'll probably figure out a new equilibrium at some point soon in terms of like when my meetings are happening and when I'm traveling, and then when Josiah's got various obligations. So I just wanted to put that out there if you guys were wondering. We're still good. We're still going. And yeah. So I guess we want to talk about like actually several things. I don't know, like I don't know which ones we'll get to, but we want to talk about. So there's a couple of conferences: the National Conservatism Conference, and then there was some abundance related conference, and so we're going to talk about both of those. But I wanted to like put it out there that we're going to talk about those. Um, you know, kind of like they're kind of related to each other in a weird way, or not related, but like in parallel political
Right.
track in terms of like the way I would describe it. Like I'm going to describe it because just before. So national conservatism is this thing. I think that the conference first started in 2018. Was it during? It's been a
Is
while.
it was
Was it
something like
2018?
that.
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
if it
because like
was.
Yoram Herzoni had um, a book called The Virtues of Nationalism. I think you read that book. I read a
I
little bit
did
of
read it.
it.
Yes. Yeah.
It was, let's see. I don't have like a big beef with Yoram Herzoni, but a lot of establishment conservatives, like say like Jonah. So actually, like I'll tell you guys, I heard Jonah Goldberg, interview Yoram Herzoni about his book,
Mhm.
and it was like it was a good interview, and like actually Herzoni, like I have to say, he was on Ezra Klein's podcast recently. He seems like a normal person, if that makes. I mean, he
Yeah.
has like he's married, he's got a lot of family, or he's got a big family. He lives in Israel. He did Aliyah. He's, I think, American that went back to Israel. I think his wife is actually a convert to Judaism. But anyway, neither here nor
Mm-hmm.
there. But it's just like, and then talking to Ezra Klein, I mean, some of the people associated with like nationalism, conservative nationalism, are kind of weird. Okay, they're
Mm.
not normal people. I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of socialists are not normal people. I think like one reason Zoran Mamdani is so successful is because he dresses and looks normal, and I think that that's
Right.
really appealing to people. Yoram Herzoni, I mean, yeah, he's got a yarmulke, he's a Jewish guy, but aside from that, he's very normal and personable. And so I think there's a reason that he was like a good face, promoting this idea of national conservatism. And the idea behind national conservatism is basically kind of like reformulate the way the conservative movement in the United States. I mean, he's Israeli; it's obviously an international project, but really,
Right.
the conference is happening in the United States, and Donald Trump is, at this point, the main like exponent on the political level of like a conservatism that's more inflected by nationalism, more open to immigration skepticism, more open to state intervention maybe in the market, like less libertarian, definitely for sure, and also much more ambivalent and ambiguous toward neoconservatism, towards like the foreign policy, muscular foreign policy that was basically exemplified by George W. Bush administration. Meanwhile, with abundance, I think one way to explain abundance would just be supply side liberalism. And so I think like one of the things, not one of the things motivating abundance is liberals like Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, who wrote the book, but also Matt Iglesias, my friend Armand. I'm gonna say D because I can't say the last name. It's like Polish. You know, I mean, there are these people. They're liberal. They're to the left, but you know they're yimbys. They want more housing. They want more deregulation. Matt Iglesias has been abundance before it was the thing. He would
Right.
complain even like 15 years ago about regulation for like salons and like barbers and stuff, where it's like, oh, why do you need like all of these permits and like all of this training classes to be a hairstylist, you know? So
Mhm.
basically, the idea here is a little bit like, you know, Dick Hanania has said it's a little bit like bringing libertarianism to the left or to the liberals, you know? Deregulate and allow economic growth to kind of, you know, make people wealthier and happier. I mean, it's really not that different from 1980s supply sideism in some ways in terms of its vibe. It's
Right.
like, don't worry about the redistribution, economic growth will take care of itself, which we've talked about housing extensively. Uh, it's a real problem in the blue states, but here in Texas, they just let people build. And even in Texas, you know, I have to be clear, there's still people that resist and there's all sorts of problems, but it's like next level in a place like California where they are increasing the number of people and keeping the supply constant or decreasing because like some houses get condemned and what that and stuff like that. So abundance liberalism is basically saying, look, we need to save liberal America from itself by deregulation and reemphasizing innovation and economic growth. And in that way, it's a lot like the tech right or the pre-tech right kind of, you know, the economically libertarian supply side right. So you have these two movements that are kind of like coming to the fore. I would say national conservatism is much more advanced. It started earlier,
Right.
and it's basically kind of taken over the Republican Party in the United States. Abundance liberalism is not nearly at that stage; it's still more of an intellectual movement. But national conservatism was arguably an intellectual movement before, you know, it really, you know, kind of took the reins of power in Trump too. So I guess, you know, I've been talking like intro, like Josiah, like you've actually been to the National Conservatism Conference, I think,
No, I went to the
and you
first
know
one.
some of the yeah,
Yeah.
you've gone to like these pre-abundance things too, in terms of like,
Right. Yes.
you know, yeah.
Um, I haven't. I was not at Abundance, but some of my R Street colleagues were at Abundance. I think one of them spoke at Abundance. I know there was a big like expose report that was put out about abundance and like the secret abundance funding and networks and whatever. R Street was mentioned in there um, unfairly. I mean, the way they characterized us, I think, was a little unfair, which is probably true for most of the stuff. But anyway, um, yeah, I went to the very first National Conservatism Conference, which was either in, I don't know if it was in 2017 or 2018. I feel like it was probably in 2017 because it was uh, would have been easier for me to go in 2017 than in 2018, just for personal life related reasons. But
Wait, okay. So I hear it said the conferences developed between May 2019 and February 2020. I don't
okay,
know.
well
So
maybe it
maybe
was.
but it was before the pandemic. You went, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess. I mean, my if that's what it says, my recollection is that it was somewhat earlier in Trump won, um, but perhaps not. Maybe this is just an indication of how kind of slow off the ground a lot of stuff in Trump one was, that it could feel like it was still 2017 in
Yeah.
2019. But anyway, um, both of these are obviously. I don't think that there's similarity in content between both of these conferences and both of the associated movements. They have a kind of vision for society, which are very different. They're similar in that both of them are trying to kind of reshape their half of the political spectrum in a certain way. And so the nationalism, NatCon, depending on who you talk to, is either trying to reshape the conservative movement away from the old, what gets called zombie Reaganism or establishment conservatism or whatnot. It's either that, maybe I some people will say that it was saw that nationalism was the way of the future and wanted to kind of morph it in certain directions and away from certain other directions, which is a possibility. I don't know. Anyway, but the goal is realignment, right? It's a realignment type of movement, it's a realignment type of conference, and that is something that I think it does have in common with abundance, which is also trying to reshape the left side of the aisle in a more uh, pro building uh, direction. And it is, I should say, I mean, I don't like, you don't want to uh, say things about what I view as a overall positive development that will hurt them or whatever. But I mean, I do think, it's a left wing, it's a left of center type thing. Um, but there are some, like, I think there were some stand together people at the conference, right? Which is Koch, Charles,
Okay, yeah. It's just like criminal
and
justice reform. Like
right, yes.
some of the
And then
abundance
I
things
also
like
think,
have like broader appeal.
yeah, and the at least the expose report said that Mark Andreessen had some involvement in funding it. I don't know if that's true or not, but he certainly is a like pro. Let's build. I think he wrote an essay. It's time to build or something, right? So even though he's more associated now with the kind of tech right of center Trump
Yeah,
type stuff, um, those aspects of the abundance agenda, I think would appeal to him. So anyway, so they are trying to reshape. Uh, both of them are kind of realignment conferences, I would say, right? Um, and maybe move the different parties uh, back towards. I mean, abundance, I would say, in a way, wants to move the Democrats back towards the center, and I would also say that's true of Nat Khan and the Republicans, but not the center as typically conceived. The typical conception of the center that you see in media is fiscally conservative, socially liberal, or something like that, right? Um, and that's not what nationalism is. But if you look at opinion polling, what do people want? I think David Frum, back after the Romney defeat, summed it up quite nicely. He said people want less immigration and more health care, right? So that's kind of uh, you know it's a movement that is takes kind of hardline stances, perhaps on issues like immigration, crime, um, some other stuff, but while remaining, I mean, they're not socialists, at least uh, depends on who you talk to, I guess, but they do not consider themselves as socialists. They consider themselves pro market, pro business, but they're not as absolutist on it as old style Republicans would be, at least rhetorically. So I mean, these are interesting. I don't know. It's an open question in my mind, and this is kind of an admission against interest since I work for a think tank. I work in like the ideas type of thing, but it's never been entirely clear to me whether these ideological movements are leaders or followers in terms of politics. Are they are they leading indicators, or are they trailing indicators? Are they actually influencing things, or is it the case that the public mood shifts and then intellectuals come in and try and rationalize it somehow, right? As opposed to laying the groundwork for it. That's something that I think you can argue both ways, historically
hmm
and at the current moment. Um,
yeah. I mean, there are certain things. There are certain things that I think. we know like certainly these cultural liberal things, for example, intellectuals were ahead of the curve on abortion rights or gay rights, for
Right.
example. I mean, they're arguably like decades ahead of where the
Yeah.
public eventually came to be. Uh, I think on the right, I think some of like Milton Friedman, some of the Chicago School guys during the period of stagflation in the 1970s, when Keynesianism, like Nixon said, we are all Keynesians. I think was ascendant, but there was a counterculture on the intellectual right, which obviously came to power or became much more influential during the Reagan administration.
Right.
Reagan and Thatcher as well. They were both both influenced, for example, by Hayek, F.A. Hayek, not Selma, but um, but no,
Yeah.
but so I think that intellectuals can well, so I will say, for example, I think American Conservative, which I've written for American Conservative in 2003 and 2024. It's like that's a big gap, but
Yeah.
I've known people at AmCon, the American Conservative. Pat Buchanan is not well. So
Yes. Right.
best wishes to Pat. Obviously, I'm sure he doesn't listen to this podcast, but I think those of us who know that he is in very ill health right now. And
Right. For
um,
quite a
you
while,
know,
I would say, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, from everything that I heard last year, I am surprised that he hasn't passed away. I mean, I'm just gonna say that. Like
Right.
honestly, like I've heard it's pretty bad.
Yes.
So, but Pat Buchanan, has certain ideas that are much more mainstream now. Obviously, American Conservative as a whole, we're old enough to remember what it was like during the global war on terror and what it must have been like, or what it was like for conservative quote unquote writers who wrote for the American Conservative, and
Mhm.
like how they were
Right.
treated in terms of like, oh, are you guys like, terrorists? You support terrorists? I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it wasn't that far. It was like very, very outside. The restrainers, as they were being called, were so outside the conservative mainstream. And then
Yeah.
obviously, with the rise of Trump, they've come closer to the mainstream. They are not the mainstream, although
Right.
arguably JD Vance is definitely influenced by a lot of those restrainer ideas. So, in
Mhm.
terms of like Ukraine and other things. But my point here is, there was a group of intellectuals who were uh, in some ways they were vindicated. I think arguably in a way, David Frum, who is now not, I mean, he's at the Atlantic. I mean, he's technically conservative, just like I think how David Brooks would be technically conservative. They're not far
Right.
left or anything, but they're more blue tribe coded now, especially David Frum. And like I've had like friendly relations with David in terms of just like on the internet and stuff like that. He's actually promoted my Substack, and he's interested in some of the intellectual things I'm interested in. I will say in 2010, I think David Frum was actually somewhat correct in that conservatives. I mean, he was very explicit that like that basically focusing this much political capital on healthcare was going to be a problem over the long term. But also, he did quietly, but he did say it. Probably they should have focused on immigration, which, in a way, the irony of the David Trump, like arc, or not, or the from arc. I said David
Yeah.
Trump from arc is that he, in some ways, his policy prescriptions align with Trump, especially in 2016.
Yeah. Domestic policy, yes.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
problem
Domestic.
David.
Although even on like foreign policy, from has definitely moderated. You know, from his. I mean,
Yeah, perhaps. But not.
well, I mean,
I mean,
he admits that Iraq was the wrong move. Like that was something
sure.
big to admit. A while
Sure.
ago. So you have these like weird like situations where I think going back to the intellectuals, like they do make the correct call sometimes in terms of what the trajectory what is going to be, but they don't always get the credit. Like the AmCon people are
Right.
not like living high on the hog right now, like the Weekly Standard people were 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and some of that I think has to do with being willing to seize the moment when it comes along. 20 years ago or so, there was a group uh, of people on the right who wanted to see. I mean, I think it was called reform conservatism. You might remember, and
Later became Reformicon. Later they became
yeah, they
Reformicons.
reformicons. That was kind of Yeah, and
Grand New Party, Rehan Salam, Ross Douthat, later
right, Ross
Ramesh Ponnuru.
Douthat, yes, Raihan, from I think was maybe loosely affiliated
He
with
was
that.
adjacent. He was adjacent.
Ramesh, um, Khan,
Also, people forget this. From was Maha. Like what he used to write a
oh,
lot about how like big gulp conservatism was bad
okay,
and that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
America's public health and obesity. People forget like all the weird things that he was into that are now like mainstream, but now he's blue coded, so whatever.
right. So anyway, so those people, I mean, many of whom I like, some of whom I'm friends with or whatever, they had this vision that the Republican, I think they accurately forecast the situation that the then existing Republican Party was kind of sputtering on fumes, and it needed to kind of update to take account of both policy and political changing realities. And I don't think that Trump was reading. I don't know that Trump read Grand New Party. Um, uh, but he definitely, in one respect, um, was on that course and is at least was open. I think to some of those types of ideas. And for the most part, my impression is that the you know the pundits or thinkers who associated with that movement when Trump came along, I mean, it's sort of like that bit in the Matrix, not like this, right? So that for other reasons, whether it was his style or his foreign policy views or whatever, they they saw it not as an opportunity, but as we don't want to be associated with this because it will, taint the movement. And so as a result, I think they kind of mostly ended up sidelining themselves in terms of influence. Now, I mean, Ross is still a New York Times columnist. Ryan runs the Manhattan Institute or whatever, so it's not like they're you don't want to go overboard in
I
terms
think
of.
isn't Ramesh the editor in chief of
I
the
think he's
National Review?
I think he's some sort of editor. I with magazines, it's hard for me to actually understand who's in charge of what because it's like, well, isn't Rich Lowry running that? Oh yeah, he's still running it. It's just Ramesh is editor in chief. Okay, whatever. Um, he's got some other title, I guess. But yeah, so I mean, they're still around or whatever. But I think that if they had to give another example, another group of people who I would say were probably not a natural fit for Trump and Trump won were the supply siders, the Larry Kudlows, the Steve Moores, right? That was not an obvious. That was not a. I mean, it's not like Trump was pro taxes or whatever, but it just wasn't an obvious fit. They, if anything, would have been more identified with like the older form of conservatism, but they really got behind Trump, and as a result, they got a bunch of high level staffing positions in the Trump one administration, and I think drove a lot of domestic policy. What were the signature issues? So
Tax cuts, yeah.
yeah, tax cuts. So and same with like the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo and all of that or something. So to some extent, I mean, it's not enough to be right. You have to be willing to seize the opportunity in a way now that perhaps tech people like Elon or Andreessen or whatever are having an influence in Trump too. It's I would say the Trump two administration is a bit more Trumpian because there's a deeper bench now. Um, but yeah, so you got to be willing to kind of seize the opportunity in a way that it just didn't happen for whatever reason. I would say, and to some extent, I mean, maybe Nat Khan is like the heir to that, right? I mean, there is, for all the talk about realignment and so on and so forth, there's a lot of continuity. There's a lot of people who uh, were around. I mean, were around 20 years ago on the right, and they're around today on the right, and they've updated, right, uh, rhetorically and substantively on some stuff, but there's continuity of personnel at least, and a lot of the ideas are you can exaggerate how big of a change there has actually been. I would say from the old. I mean, uh, even stuff like immigration. Certainly under George W. Bush, and there has long been a kind of wing within the conservative movement or Republican Party or whatever that's friendly to immigration, so on and so forth. But there's also been like a pretty sizable skeptic wing. William F. Buckley, I think he used to, he used to write fondly about Camp of the Saints or whatever, right? So um, there's probably less change than you might think, but there has been sizable change too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in the 1990s and into the 2000s, I think it was obvious, just like from an objective perspective, that the Republican Party elites were they were putting a lid on brewing restrictionist sentiment, but also anti-free trade sentiment,
Right.
and generally just like more skepticism to the market than the libertarianism of the Republican Party of that era would indicate.
Yes.
And like Trump broke through. I mean, there have been attempts to break through in earlier periods. I mean, Buchanan was a high profile attempt, but there were
Buchanan. I mean,
Tom Tancredo tried to run as an anti-immigration in 2008, I think, for the presidency. It
correct.
didn't really take off. So, I mean,
Right. Yeah.
sometimes you have the man needs to meet the moment and other things like that. There are all sorts of reasons we can say, but and also people who've looked at the Tea Party, the social science, they say like anti-immigration sentiment was like a big part of it. It wasn't really as libertarian as, and
Um,
I talked to Matt Welch on a podcast about this. He basically admits that the Kochs and like a lot of the libertarians tried to ride that wave, but it turned out that the basic Tea Party person who was angry about Obama's America was not a reasoned Cato
right.
libertarian. Let's just say,
Yes.
But
Yes. Right.
going back to national conservatism, the conference, I will say I've talked to some friends about it. Some people on social media have talked about this, but the energy was apparently like a little low compared to previous years.
Yeah.
I think one hypothesis for why the energy is a little low is, uh, I mean, a lot of the people are now in the administration. There's been a lot of victories,
Right.
and it's kind of like sometimes when you win, and you got what you want, like going to a conference and scheming about how you're going to do more things is not as exciting anymore. So there's a lot of
Yes.
possibilities in the previous years of the National Conservative Conference. I feel because a lot of things hadn't happened. Some of the things that they wanted have definitely happened. I mean, I think the immigration stuff. I think we have like changed in a radical way. Trump has I don't really know if Trump's foreign policy is a national conservative foreign policy. I don't really know if anyone has like a good model for what is going on here, but it's something different. He's definitely
Right.
not a neocon, and he's definitely an American nationalist. So
Yeah. But
that's been a real thing.
he's not a like Ron Paul.
Yeah,
He's not a restrainer. I guess I would say.
yeah.
Uh,
Although he does say restraining things every now and then.
right.
And I don't know like the backstory about this. Michael Anton's leaving the State Department soon,
Mhm.
so he was a big Claremont pickup. So it's hard to predict. We're not even a year into it. I do think that the NatCon, like if JD Vance is a NatCon, I think like in terms of economic policy and other things, I think we're seeing at least like gestures towards that direction of economic nationalism with the tariff policy, obviously in terms of what they whether they succeed or not, like their aspiration is in a particular direction. And obviously, when it comes to culture and race, I think the Trump administration has been a radical shift away from the trend in American
Yes.
politics, where the left was
Right.
very, very radical. The Democrats were pretty radical on that sort of stuff, and the Republicans were not radical, but they were moderate in terms of just slowing the rate of change. Whereas Trump has actually
Yeah.
reversed on some of that,
Yeah.
with
Even
anti-weight racism.
yeah. I would say this is probably um, perhaps the biggest, most significant shift in policy has to do with, I mean, now we call it DEI stuff. That's a newer term, but there some of the stuff with regard to affirmative action or other things. It it it's gone farther than even under the Reagan administration, right? You've gone back, I think, some executive orders that date from LBJ, have been
Yeah, yeah.
repealed.
We're rolling back before Nixon and LBJ.
Yeah, so this is really significant, and it's strange that there has been, I mean, there's been some focus on it from the media, but actually the response has been pretty muted, especially compared to some of the other things that uh, people on these shows get into a tizzy about. And one possible reason for that is just that if you look at polling, affirmative action and these DEI type policies are very unpopular. They're unpopular pretty much across all racial groups too, right? Um, so maybe that makes it a little hard to make a big stink about it. We'll have to see how. I mean, uh, myself always looking for the gloomy lining or whatever. The next thing is, well, if next time there's a Democrat president, how easy will it be to just restart all that stuff? So that's hard to say. But yeah, that I think is a pretty huge shift, comparable in effect to, I mean, the biggest in Trump one, the biggest change I would say would just be the judiciary and reshaping the judiciary. And in Trump two, this I would say is the biggest change so far. We're not even a year into the administration, so who knows? But um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the sort of thing that could have major implications, even more than the immigration stuff or the foreign policy stuff or whatnot. And it's an issue. It is an issue where, at least on paper, Trump is in continuity with the old, you know, Reagan with Reaganism or whatever. I mean, it's always been the official.
Well, I mean, he's made the rhetoric real,
Yes, yeah, yeah, right. So
right? It
that's
was
the
just it
question
was
is, sometimes sometimes some of the people, I'm not going to name names or anything, but some of the people who criticize Trump for like abandoning conservatism or whatever, when he does something that conservatives have been arguing for forever, suddenly it turns out that they didn't really mean it.
Mhm,
um,
mhm,
I think, I mean,
mhm.
even like, I mean, this is a Trump one thing, but when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, uh, which I don't know that it really affected anything that much, but this was like a long-standing. Every Republican was like, "We're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem," and then they just not do it. And so that's an interesting thing. Sometimes there's more follow through with Trump. Like he's in some, despite the fact that he's not a very ideological guy, I would say certainly he's not a Reagan guy, but in some ways he's more Reagan than Reagan in terms of like where he does agree, he might just do it. So interesting thing to contemplate.
Yeah. So, we have some national. Oh, okay. I'm gonna give some people some red meat. Insights that I had or that I've heard from NatCon. A friend of mine was in the audience, and during the Kurt Mills versus the World panel, it revolved around on Israel policy, and Kurt Mills was taking the anti-Zionist position basically. But apparently, in the
Yeah.
audience, it was split insofar as there are a lot of young Groiper or Groiper adjacent people that were in the audience, and they were not um, the Yoram Herzoni aligned faction. And so it was interesting to see that Israel skepticism showed up at the National Conservatism Conference, which, obviously Yoram Herzoni has been Israeli.
Right.
not an Israeli American anymore. He's an American Israeli, I guess now is what he is. But so I think that that's one thing that's just keep an eye on, because we know people that are younger who are in the conservative movement. They just don't care about Israel that much. They're not like anti-Israel, but they just don't care. I think that's a real thing.
I mean, some of
People
them
just
are
need to keep an
anti-Israel. Some of them
yes.
are, I say like basically, and this is true. I think um, of both left and right, but maybe it's more surprising on the right. I don't know. But Israel, it does seem like it's becoming much more of an age stratified than it's an age stratified issue more than anything else. Where if you're a boomer, whether you're a boomer Republican or you're a boomer Democrat, you're probably pretty pro Israel. And um, and these are overall, but it's just like as you get younger, the pro Israel portion of the population shrinks, the I don't really care population grows, and the explicitly anti Israel population also kind of grows, Um, and it doesn't, um, it shows up in lots of odd places, I would say. And some of that,
Mm.
some of that I think just has to do with history. If you're old enough, I mean, even me, my age, if you're in your 40s, you are old enough to remember like when Israel Palestine was all about. I mean, Clinton was offering deals at Camp David that Arafat was rejecting, and there was a second Intifada and terrorism, that sort of stuff, right? Um, Whereas now it seems like, well, what do you remember? Well, of course, October 7th, but most days what you see on the news or other things is Israel launching attacks on people, and uh, with collateral, you know heartbreaking images and all that sort of other stuff. Obviously, you can put it in larger context. People, I know all the arguments, of like why this is necessary, justified, so on and so forth. But um, it just, I think it gives people a kind of a different perspective if you're young and that's all you've known, as opposed to remembering what things were like when Israel wasn't quite so dominant. Um, and so I expect that to kind of grow and I mean, there's a number like there are a number of really big uh, figures on the right or institutions on the right um, that just do a lot of anti-Israel content now. Tucker does a lot of anti-Israel stuff. Uh, the American Conservative. I mean, sometimes I go there and it's like all about Israel, right? Right? Negative stuff. Candace Owen. That's before you even get into like the Candace Owenses of the world or whatever. So I expect that to just grow, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. But that's definitely something people shouldn't sleep on. I don't think it's just a passing phase.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. I think that that's going to be, things don't change until they change. Three-legged stool conservatism with like the low, economic libertarianism, old school kind of like evangelical social conservatism, and the muscular, neocon foreign policy was. I mean, there was no conception that there was any alternative until Trump showed up, and then all of a sudden there was just a sea change, right? And so, cultural political processes can sometimes have these like non-linear positive feedbacks where it's, preference falsification cascade kicks in, and everything has changed. So I think that that is something to think about. I don't really want to talk about this on this podcast. Maybe later, but you know, I think we need to think. I mean, I would bet that depending on how redistricting goes and whatnot, the Democratic Party is not very popular, but I think there are, frankly, if I had to put my money on it, there are some really bad signals for the Republicans right now.
Mm.
Mostly I really think it's going to be domestic economy. Actually,
Yeah.
whatever. There's other stuff going on, but I think the domestic economy is not looking great. Those of us who have been, I was somewhat happy actually, obviously, because I live in this economy too. But the initial liberation day and all the tariff stuff wasn't really hitting us. I think it's pretty clear now that we're starting to see the adjustments and in terms of so for example, just the clearest thing, which is an obvious thing, is like domestic manufacturers who we're trying to help with a lot of the tariffs. Their inputs are from other countries,
Right.
and so it's having the opposite, which was
What? What? Why was I not informed?
So, I think that's not going to be great for Republicans, even though Democrats have no message to replace. I think what we're going to see the second Trump administration, the second 2 years, we still have a year to go, but it looks like in terms of domestic policy, I don't really know like how much else they what else they have on the docket. It's going to be like another impeachment and whatever, just the usual food fight. I think we're going to start to look at the post-Trump era of a Trump party in a way. And so
Mhm.
I think there's some discussions about JD Vance, who you've
Yeah.
met JD. He was been on your podcast. JD and I have corresponded, and who is the real JD Vance? There's gonna be a lot of books about that. I think my friend James Pogue is going to be making a lot of money because he has been
Yeah.
profiling JD for many many years. There's gonna be some book in 2027, so whatever. I think
Let me just
yeah.
interject to say that among one chapter of JD's storied career and history is he was at one time, to tie it back, he was at one time a contributor to From Forum. So
Yeah.
in some ways he maybe he did seize the opportunity a little bit.
Well, if you look at JD, the hillbilly elegy JD of Trump won before he was running for the Senate, there was a very Ross Douthat, Rayhan Salam vibe.
Correct.
Arguably even more liberal than them, or more blue coated than them. So
Right.
he's changed, but I think we both agree. We both like him as a person. Obviously, you probably know him a little bit better, but he's a brilliant guy. He's smart. He's quote unquote based.
Yeah.
So I don't agree. I don't agree with his stuff about reviving small towns in the Midwest. Honestly, I just think that we need to look to into the future and not the past. And I think the American economy is restructuring, and we're not going to roll it back.
Mhm.
And I do oppose. I guess I have to say, I do oppose the anti-monopoly people. It just seems like in theory, they have some good points, but in practice, they don't really have any workable alternative that I can see. We're not going to go back to small family groceries. My father in law's dad was a grocer, an old school grocer. And that was a whole profession. You have these small neighborhood groceries, and they got replaced by supermarkets. It's
Right.
called a supermarket. We don't even think about the fact
Yeah.
that it's called a supermarket and what a radical transformation of American life that was in the second half of the 20th century. But it was, and we're never going to go back. And now we
Yeah.
have mega supermarkets like Walmart supercenters. We're never going to go back. Okay, the grocers are not going to be coming back. We need to figure out a way going forward. That's what I would say. But about that, we should talk a little bit about abundance, because I was actually looking at the speakers, and I think the left does have a valid point. I'm gonna name some of the. Uh, so I don't know this guy Daniel Zalnikov, Montana State Senator, but he's a Republican. Caleb Watney, I do know he is a center right guy.
Mhm.
I mean,
But
he is an
Caleb
abundance guy.
is a former colleague of mine. He used to work at our street.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've hung out with Caleb. I mean, he's a center right guy. He's
Yeah.
not. You have Steve Tellis at Niskanen. I don't know what his positioning is, but he's definitely not a left winger. David Shore, the right winger's favorite left winger in the world.
Right.
You
Right.
have Leah Labresco Sargent, convert from atheism to Catholicism. These
Right.
people are starting Santa Ruiz, who we know, Institute for Progress, definitely center right. We got your colleague Philip Rossetti at R Street. We got Rayhan Salam, the president of the Manhattan Institute.
Yeah.
James Pethokoukis,
Lucas. Yeah.
Yeah, who's American Enterprise, but he's definitely like tech right intellectual par excellence, right? Like he's definitely like a futurist, pro future, pro market guy.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I like his stuff, but then we got Virginia Pastrell, like old school futurist. So she's been around for a long time. Again, like tech right libertarian person. We got someone from Nvidia. I'm just saying they're from Nvidia. Like if you're left winger, you're gonna get angry about that. You have Utah Congresswoman Celeste Malloy. She's a Republican. Like, what's going on with that? You got Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah. You got Charles Layman, who wants to put everyone in jail. Charles is a friend of ours. He's been on this podcast, so
Yes.
I can say
Yes.
that. Julius Krein, who was like a MAGA guy before he's not. Whatever. Garrett Jones, who's a friend of mine, has been on my podcast. I've known Garrett for almost 20 years now.
Sure.
Uh, Thomas Hockman, who is Nate Hockman's brother, but like kind of again a center right guy. Sam Hammond, who is definitely center right coded, a friend of ours, foundation from FAI. Anyway, it goes on and on. There are a lot of people.
And I
There
should
are
say
a lot of people that are very right that are right coded on this.
okay, yeah, but and you're not. I want to be clear. You're not reading the entire roster. Like there are left coded people there
Yes,
too.
but near the bottom,
But
near the bottom half,
yeah,
it definitely looks like to be about like 2/3, like center to center right, and then at the
uh-huh.
top, you have Derek Thompson, who's a liberal journalist, Ezra
Right.
Klein, liberal journalist, and Spencer Cox, Republican governor of Utah.
Sure.
So at the top, I think that they definitely tried to skew it.
Yes.
But like as you go further and further down, you see aside from Matt Iglesias, which I don't know why. Oh, because they did. Okay, so this is like alphabetical. It just happens to be random. Um, aside from the top three, it's alphabetical. Okay,
Okay. Well,
but of the
maybe
top three,
this is an interesting
yeah.
sociological thing. Do right wingers? I mean, are liberals more likely to have names
No,
that are
no,
alphabetically early in the alphabet?
no, I don't.
I
No,
can see, if I were
yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell, um, I could see, this is all about how, when you're in the second grade and they're doing things alphabetically, if you're at the front, then, that's going to instill liberal values in you because you're like, oh, the teacher, is always calling on me first and I get to be at the front of the line. And if your name is like at the end or whatever in the alphabet, then you're going to become some sort of conservative or reactionary because you're like, yeah, I'm always being left out, right? Because they don't get to me till the very end.
Well,
Um,
okay, so I just clicked on like something called the Astera Institute, which I hadn't heard about. But one of the guys from the Astera Institute, like whatever, co-founder, board chair, or something, he's here. And like I look at it and I see Kate Hall, who I met at Manifest Conference. I'm just saying that these are people that I meet at these like rationalist type conferences. They're like neoliberal, libertarian. If I'm a left wing person, like there's some. It's like the two guys who are like headlining Abundance are liberals,
right.
but like a lot of these people are, ideologically suspect. They're ideologically suspect. I see American Enterprise Institute. I see Hoover History Lab. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? I see Niskanen Center, Niskanen Center, Niskanen Center, Manhattan Institute. Now Niskanen, like for a right wing person, is like, oh, they're squish, but like they're definitely centrist at best.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, maybe like that. Is it? Are we behind the paywall? I don't want to give out the big conspiracy. No, I mean, look. I will. I think. I don't. I wonder. Sometimes you have an idea and you want it to be left coded or right coded, and you think it should be, but then when you put it out there, you find that you're getting a strange new respect or a disproportionate amount of your support is not coming from where you think it should be coming from. And with abundance, I mean, and I think Ezra, in some of the interviews that he's done about his book, has kind of conceded this that a lot of these are issues where um, they are blue state problems. In red states, they're already doing a lot of this stuff, and not
Well, Montana's a very NIMBY state. That's why Montana's like, you
okay.
know,
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, Texas, for example, if you want to build a wind and solar project in Texas, it's probably one of the best. If I'll go further, I think it's probably the best state in the nation if you want to do that. Not because the state is all in on renewable energy. It's not. In fact, there's a lot of political hostility to it, rhetorically at least. But you can just do it. You don't have to get a bunch of people's permission the way that you have to, say, in California, which is ostensibly supportive of this sort of stuff, but has all sorts of other rules just against development in general, environmental stuff, zoning, whatever. And so, yeah, it seems they've identified, I would say, one big issue in politics is how to do like brand differentiation without substance differentiation, if you know what I mean. Like you take it, if you're on the left and you see and or on the right and you see an issue where you think, okay, what the Republicans are saying on this issue is substantively like 90% correct. Like you could quibble about it at the edges or whatever, right? But it would be bad to come in and do the opposite of what they are doing on this issue. A problem then becomes is like, okay, well, how do we reframe it so that we can keep doing it? That we can pursue roughly the same policies objectively, but in a way where it doesn't look like we're just caving to the Republicans and doing what they want to do on the issue, or vice versa. This is something. I mean, I think this is it's not a problem that gets that much attention because people don't like to talk about it, but I do think it comes up a lot where there are a lot of issues where people kind of recognize, at least the elites kind of recognize, hey, that they both kind of agree, but in our political system, you're not allowed to agree with the other side. Like everything's got to be completely black or white, right or wrong.
Negative polarized. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I think part of it though. Let's call it out for what it is. Most people are retarded, and they don't actually think for themselves. And
Right.
so a lot of times they'll be like, "Oh, the libs think that, so the opposite must be true," and
Right.
vice versa. Like,
Yes.
oh, actually, it's a little suspicious that Republicans favor building housing. Okay,
Right.
like again, that sounds kind of
Right.
retarded. Like, why, why,
Yes.
why would you be like suspicious that people favor building housing? But this is how people think. This is how
Right.
people think. So Spencer Cox, a Republican, although like a relative squish, like I'm on our group chats, people like talk about how he's like a cuck all the time. So I don't really know much about him, but he's
Yeah.
Mormon, so he has that face. No offense, you know what I'm saying. It
Right.
doesn't help. It doesn't help. Like Mormon guys are super nice, and they do look like they're gonna be like
He
rolled all
did
over.
look. I
But
mean, he's not Mike Lee. He's not like.
yeah, yeah.
Just,
But the point here is like having Republicans be an ally is an automatically suspect thing, even though like with, for example, there were Republican allies during the uh, criminal justice reform.
right.
There were Republicans. So and vice versa. There are liberals that like support things that Republicans support too. Like actually, they're right about this, quote unquote.
Right. Right.
But the reality is, most people don't think in those terms because, like, first of all, politics is not super important, and second of all, most people are stupid. You know. And so when you combine that thing, and you get like these negative polarization waves all the time. So, for example, Ukraine became negatively polarized. Most people
Mhm.
had no idea what the hell was going on in Ukraine. All these like libs started putting Ukraine like flags, like they
Right.
became the pro. Like there were like Gen X, like my friend Leighton Woodhouse, Gen X anti Iraq war, where he was like, wait a second, I'm not pro Putin, but
Right.
do
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
need to go all in on saying that like one
Right.
acre of Ukrainian soil is like they were
Yeah.
making he was making a rational point, but people flipped out and were like, "Oh, you're Putin's stooge." These liberals did, and then you
Mhm.
had people on the right. I had some right wing friends who were like super pro Russia because, well,
Because
they just
Biden's pro
hated you.
Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah, there's I mean, I actually think that was milder. The enforcement on Ukraine was more of a left thing, and for some reason, the establishment left became the pro-war party
Right.
in a way, right? But
Yeah.
this wasn't due to like deep thought about foreign policy. It wasn't. They still don't know where Ukraine is. They're still kind of like confused. They know Putin's bad, which okay, that's fair. He kind of is bad, you know. He's a bad guy, you know. But my point here is like this sort of thinking, like you would make fun of it. These like liberal intellectuals would make fun of it like 20 years ago when the right would do it on the war on terror, you know, like this overly simplistic thinking. But it's
Right.
okay when it's your own side, you know. And so you
Right.
have these like situations going on. I think okay, I think going back to the abundance, they are making very specific critiques in an analytical way, backed up by. So, for example, when Ezra Klein was on some show with Sam Sater, was that his name or
Sam Sater is a
or
guy, yeah. So he has a show, I think.
some like some, I don't watch it, so yeah, Emma Vigeland is on that show. Okay, so people can look at it. But basically, the Sam guy, I think, he was like Ezra Klein was like, okay, like so if like capitalism, if developers are the problem, why is housing why is housing so much cheaper in Texas? And like this guy just started like rambling about commodification and you know
Right.
stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
didn't have an answer. He
Right.
didn't have an answer
Because
because they
there is
don't
no
really
answer.
have an answer. No, well, because like the issue is like you want housing to be commodified. That's a retarded thing to say,
Right.
honestly.
Right.
Like if it's a commodity, that means it's getting cheaper and cheaper through competition, and it's spreading throughout the whole population, as opposed to being like a value-added luxury good. You know.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
and
like
I
again, if
mean,
you
yeah, and it's not like I mean, not to get afield from your point, but it's not like government built housing isn't not. It's an idea that has been tried, you know. So
yeah.
I don't think that's. In fact, I'm sure there's still. I mean, I don't know. Is there public housing in New York? Probably. Um, but yeah. So
Yeah, so it's called the Majority Report, and Sam Sater, yeah, and like Emma Vigeland. And it was Sam Sater, and if you just watch it, you can just see that he's just like Sam Sater is basically saying nonsense, in my
yes.
opinion. It's just like words of
Yeah.
commodification, monopoly,
I've seen the
corporate
clip, and
power.
Israel's like, yeah, okay, but what? Like, how are you going to build the houses if?
You know, they have like no response. So I mean, but the reality is people don't like that. People don't like, you know, pointy headed nerds like telling, well, actually, you know, there's something called comparative advantage. Well,
Right.
actually, they just don't, you know, and like this is the world we live in. So I think that abundance does have a problem of being like too nerdy. So we should pivot. Like let's do our last topic. We were gonna
Okay.
talk about Indians, but let's talk about like black crime
Okay.
behind the
All
paywall.
right. After the paywall, black crime.